It's quite common to read in an obituary something like, so-and-so died after a valiant battle with cancer. That's the violent metaphor that typically gets used. We battle cancer. But there are other approaches, and some of those approaches are more in keeping with the way of Jesus that we have come to know. Today, Dr. Rich Godfrey invites us to consider a healthcare system that is more closely aligned with the peace of Christ. Our first lesson comes from the Gospel of Mark, and friends find a way to get a paralyzed man to Jesus, even though they couldn't make it through the door. When Jesus returned to Capernaum, after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door. And he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. After having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Child, your sins are forgiven." And the second lesson comes from the Gospel of Matthew and tells us to take care of the least of these. And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of these, least of these, brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me."
It's a very special honor for me to be here, and I want to thank you all. I want to begin, if I may, with just a very short prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the universe, for all the stars, for the sun and for the earth, and for the 27 trillion cells that make up the human body, and for each of those particles of DNA made of 4 billion codes that make it possible for us to be here and throughout our lives. And Lord, forgive me for all the things that I'm about to share if they are not fitting in this congregation today, but I promise to do my best. Now, I must say, it's not easy to follow in the footsteps of metamodernism, or particularly John Smith. John walks in very big shoes, and I often go barefoot. And more than that, I recall John having said, well, it's sometimes considered not appropriate at the dinner table to talk about religion and politics. And of course, John went on to talk about some politics, so I'm going to do both. And so I also want to talk a little bit in the field of medicine. I have to confess that after 40 years of working as a surgical oncologist, I realized that I had chosen the wrong profession. I really should have been in general medicine and primary care, but I'm a slow learner, and I've come to where I am. So I'm going to share some of the things that I learned along the way. Next slide, John. But first, I want to thank everybody in the congregation. We talked about children that can sometimes go with hunger, and thanks to Niles Discovery Church, we've now supported this small school of orphans in Fangano Island, which is in Kenya. It has been a huge difference. This school now has about 100 children. Without the support from Niles from Niles Discovery Church, this school would not exist. So I think I speak on behalf of the children and George, and I'll talk more about the school, but I just want to really thank you again for all we've done over these 12 years. So I want to talk about a concept of home square, and home square actually comes from Kenya. It's a concept that was introduced some time ago, and what it refers to is when the people in Kenya, so many of whom had moved to Nairobi, decide to return to their home village. They call that home squared. And I'll go into what this might mean from a medical standpoint, but let me move first to what I would like to share. Now, I'm much more familiar with Mark Twain than I am with the Bible, but allow me to read you some passages. By his wounds we are healed. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned in his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Probably the one passage that's most important to me in all my life came from Jesus speaking with a legal authority for the Pharisees. And he said to him, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important commandment. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." All the law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. To love your neighbor as yourself, to me, is the greatest challenge. In many ways, it's so simple, but it's also so difficult. And I know Andrew's going to help me in singing a song that takes us there. Next slide. And the next. So I'm going to share with you, I've been working for several years, writing a book about my experience, working mostly with cancer patients, and it's been a pretty long road, and I think cancer is never a cheerful subject, but I think we have some good news, and I want to share that good news with you. Next slide. So I'm going to read these out to you. And the first comes from Elizabeth Rosenthal, is a great writer used to be with the New York Times. In the past quarter century, the American medical system has stopped focusing on health and even science. Instead, it attends more or less single-mindedly to its own profits. And the second comes from another surgeon who has written a lot in the field of surgery. And he says that by the very definition of the means for success in the capitalist world of big business, U.S. healthcare is a failure. Our system profits only a few, provides an inferior product, and does so at a cost far higher than that of its competitors. And many of you may know more than I about this, but it's remarkable that I think John mentioned our health system, compared to other developed countries, costs per capita double what any other developed country faces, and yet our statistical results are far inferior. We're like number 37. We have huge problems with this, and yet there are ways to change this and to make it better. And so I'm going to try to touch on a few of those. Next slide, John. And one of those is going to be to talk about primary care. I think it's worth noting, Robert Pearl was the executive director of Kaiser. I worked under him for many years, and he wrote a book called Health GPT MD. This is quite an interesting way to solve all the problems of healthcare. But he does point out, as do almost all the writers in this field right now, that one of the big problems in the United States is the minimum provision of primary care. Canada provides around 50% of its costs into primary care. Most developed countries are about 25%. The United States is about 5%. So we're woefully behind in this capacity. And yet, to solve the problem of chronic disease, I think we all know, is prevention is really key. So the pendulum swings back and forth. If you go back to the time of Teddy Roosevelt, there's been 27 presidents. And in that time, it's interesting to note that even out of all those presidents, 4 of them were Republicans that pushed for some kind of universal health care, and 4 Democrats did. And as we know, Kennedy had his difficulties, and it ultimately took Johnson to push through Medicare, and Barack Obama was able to push through the Obamacare. That has been a major difference. But it's each path we take is a difficult struggle. And of those 2, primary care and universal health care, I think, are the most important. But I want to talk about an area. I promised that I would bring some good news. And the good news is this. For the very first time in the history of medicine, we can actually eliminate a cancer worldwide. It's really exciting for me to be part of that project. I am blessed to be able to work with people like Jeboy Koshi and Barbara Berry. Now, I won't embarrass you guys, but go ahead and raise your hand so we all know where you are. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we've been able to do together. But it's really it's an exciting journey, and we're still just getting started in doing that. But what does it mean? How could you possibly eliminate a cancer? Well, go back to the time of polio, and now travel forth to today. And what we learned back in those days was with the collaboration and working together of many organizations, it would be possible. So to eliminate cervical cancer, what would it cost? I mean, basically it would mean every U.S. citizen would have to give up the cost of a Frappuccino. I know maybe not all of you drink Frappuccinos, but I'm willing to give up 2 or 3 if need be. And obviously it has to happen through a much larger pathway. Next slide, John. So I think you can see with polio, it took multiple organizations working together. It was started really by Rotary International in the Philippines, and they went to the WHO and said, we can do more. We can do the whole world. And nobody really took them seriously. WHO said, well, let's see if you can raise money, and they gave them a year to raise $125 million, and they raised $250 million. And since that time, they've joined with Bill and Melinda Gates and WHO, CDC, many different countries to pull together the costs so far that have been in the range of around $18 billion. However, polio is now 99.9% eradicated on the planet. So can we do that with a cancer? I really think that we can. So some of this work has been in Africa. I mentioned earlier, this is a Matibabu hospital. I've been working in this hospital almost 20 years now. And this is where I learned these unusual stories about Home Squared. I promise to tell you more, a little bit about Home Squared. But Matibabu has been a home to me. Next slide. But also some of these countries, I'll leave for Bolivia in about 4 or 5 days from now. But this has been a wonderful Rotary project. Thanks to J-Boy and Barbara, we were able to get a global grant, and it's good for 3 years. It involved, again, a lot of collaboration, but that's how all this works. And so I'm excited to work with them on this project. And actually, there's more. Next slide. So one of the areas, we now have 3 centers. Barbara was able to pull together a wonderful global grant, so we now have 3 screening centers. I should mention, how do you eliminate cervical cancer? You have to do 2 things. You have to have vaccines, and you have to have screening. The vaccines take care of the children, ages 9 to 13, and the screening takes care of the adults, usually ages 30 to 60, who are the ones that are at risk. But if we catch them early, we can do a quick examination, diagnosis, and treatment, and resolve the issue of cervical cancer. Next slide. In Nepal, I will be going back to Nepal. Here's another global grant. Thank you, Barbara, who introduced me back to the wonderful people from Nepal that I worked with in my early years. I won't give up my age, but it was a long, long time ago. And I love returning to Nepal every chance. You might see Mount Everest in the background. And yes, I was able to summit Mount Everest, but it was in an airplane. So finally, let me just talk for a minute about Home Squared. And what does that mean? So sure, there's the idea of going back to your original village, but the concept I think is important for me and maybe for many of us here is going back to the early times in your life when you may have had some not so great habits, developed bad habits. And in my family, it was drinking and smoking. I did them both to a large degree. And for some of us, maybe it was not choosing the right diet, maybe it was not having exercise. But Home Squared is basically recognizing that in order to stay healthy, we have to think back to our earliest days and come back to what is ultimately our home, which is our body. And there's another part to Home Squared, and that part I think is what I have gotten from Niles Discovery Church. And that is a home of working together and sharing a faith and sharing friendship. And part of being healthy, the most critical part, I believe, what I've seen through all my years working in the medical field, is having mental health. And mental health comes from community. So Home Squared is basically the larger community that we belong to, but especially this community. I even see some people from some other churches. I might recognize some people in the back from the South Bay Community Church, and there are others, but I want to just share with you how important this idea can be for each of us, thinking about how do we go back to our earliest time in our life and feel how we've gotten to where we are today. And that, in essence, is Home Squared.